My name is Rebecca Scott. I'm 32, and I was supposed to be counting down the final 8 weeks to the happiest day of my life. Instead, I was counting the moments until I could reclaim it. Joshua, my fiancé, had just looked me in the eye and dropped the bomb. I can't do this. I've found someone else. It wasn't a surprise. I'd known for 3 months. 3 months of careful observation, subtle questioning, and strategic planning. 3 months of letting him believe he had control, that he could manipulate, lie, and betray without consequence. And now, finally, it was my turn. Already done, I said, calm as the first sip of morning coffee. Joshua's face froze. What do you mean, already done? I gestured toward the neatly stacked boxes by the door. Wedding canceled, funds withdrawn, leases ending tomorrow, apartment emptied. Everything you thought you had, gone. He stumbled back, the words hitting him harder than I ever could have if I'd screamed. I watched him process the devastation he'd thought he could inflict on me. You knew? His voice cracked. I did, I admitted. And I've been planning. While you were lying, I was organizing my escape. I could see the betrayal in his eyes, but also something else. Fear. For months he had underestimated me, assumed my grief would make me powerless. How quaint. The apartment smelled faintly of lavender and old books, our shared life condensed into cardboard boxes and memories. I packed with precision, labeling everything, leaving no trace for him to manipulate or twist later. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with purpose. You can't just, he began, but I cut him off. Watch me. I retrieved the envelope containing the final wedding deposits. Venue, caterer, photographer, everything refunded. I made the calls, explained everything. You can't touch this. Joshua's hands trembled. He opened his mouth again, but the words failed him. For once, I was the one holding the cards. I had consulted a lawyer quietly weeks ago, not because I wanted a fight, but because I wanted control. Control over my finances, my life, my narrative. You've taken everything, he finally said, his anger mixed with disbelief. I smiled thinly. Everything you thought you had. That's the difference. The truth was simple. While he thought he was cleverly maneuvering, I had been quietly documenting every secret message, every late-night meeting, every lie. While he believed he was gaining something, he was building my arsenal. And now, as I carried the last of my belongings toward the door, I could feel the weight of years of careful planning finally paying off. I paused for a moment, looking back at the apartment that had once been our shared sanctuary. Memories flashed. Laughter over burnt dinners, the way his hand felt in mine during quiet evenings, arguments that now seemed so trivial in hindsight. I exhaled slowly. Nostalgia and betrayal, tangled together. But there was no hesitation, not anymore. I hope you're happy, I said quietly. Not a threat, not a plea, just a statement. A reminder that I was no longer trapped in his deceit. He looked at me, a mixture of rage and awe. You can't just erase everything. I already have, I said, and walked out. Outside, the air felt electric. The city hummed around me, indifferent to the drama I'd just orchestrated. I hailed a cab, sliding the first box into the back seat. Each step, each box, was a reclaiming of my agency, a statement that I would not be a victim. As the cab drove away from the apartment, Joshua's shadowed figure fading in the rearview mirror, I allowed myself the first private smile I had felt in months. This was not the end. It was the beginning of something new. The first week was chaotic, a mixture of adrenaline and exhaustion. I moved into a small extended-stay apartment, set up a temporary work routine, and slowly untangled my life from Joshua's. My savings were safe, my deposits refunded, my identity intact. And while part of me mourned the life I had imagined, another part, stronger, sharper, was thriving in the silence and control I had carved for myself. 3 months of pretending, 3 months of watching, 3 months of planning, it all culminated in this moment, and I had won. But the war was far from over. While I had taken the first decisive steps, Joshua, with his charm and entitlement, was unpredictable. Friends, family, social circles, they all needed to see the aftermath and the real consequences of his betrayal. That was the next phase, the phase where strategy met exposure and where his assumptions about me would finally shatter. I leaned back in the cab, looking out at the city lights, feeling a curious mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. This was the life I had reclaimed. Every stolen glance, every whispered lie, every secret kept, All of it had led to this, and for the first time in months, I felt free. The apartment was empty now, save for the faint scent of vanilla and our lingering echoes. I had packed everything, labeled every box with cold precision, and left no corner of that shared life for Joshua to manipulate. My hands still tingled from the work, my heart still thrummed with the thrill of reclaiming what was mine. But the real challenge had just begun, handling the aftermath of 3 months of deception. The first step was finances. While Joshua had assumed that controlling our joint wedding fund gave him power, I had quietly safeguarded everything that mattered. I had moved the deposits, secured my personal savings, and left no trace of vulnerability. The wedding fund, which he thought he could touch at will, was now firmly in my control. Each transfer, each confirmation was a small victory, a quiet victory that he would never see coming. I sat on the edge of my temporary apartment bed, staring at the neat stack of bank confirmations. My phone buzzed incessantly, but I didn't answer. Messages from Joshua, desperate, incredulous, and angry, piled up. I let them sit. Patience was part of the plan. Every desperate plea, every accusation would only serve to expose his entitlement. By mid-afternoon, I started contacting vendors. Venue, caterer, photographer, all had been canceled, all refunds processed. Each conversation was short, professional, precise. There was no room for his drama to seep in, no room for his lies to take root. The world, for a moment, felt orderly again. But it wasn't just finances. Social circles were a battlefield. Friends and family had been caught in the middle for months, some unaware of the betrayal, others suspicious but uncertain. I needed to control the narrative before Joshua could. I drafted emails, gently, carefully, explaining that the wedding was canceled due to irreconcilable differences. No blame, no dramatics, just the truth, wrapped in calm certainty. Joshua tried to call. I didn't answer. He texted, pleading, bargaining, threatening. I responded once, succinctly. All matters resolved. Funds, apartment, deposits, all accounted for. I am moving forward. Please do the same. No excuses, no anger, just clarity. And yet, part of me couldn't help but feel the lingering ache of loss. Not for him, never for him, but for the life we had imagined together. The quiet nights, the laughter, the plans, all of it gone, swept away in a tide of betrayal. But I reminded myself, what he destroyed, I reclaimed. Not with vengeance, but with control, with strategy, with patience. The next morning, I began the process of moving into a more permanent place. The small, extended stay was temporary, a bridge between the old life and the one I was building. Every cardboard box unpacked, every picture hung, every carefully arranged piece of furniture was a statement. Rebecca Scott is back in control. Messages from friends began to filter in, curiosity cloaked in concern. Some had heard fragments, rumors spun by Joshua or his allies. I answered carefully, selectively, revealing only what was necessary. The truth was a weapon. Misrepresentation from his side would only serve to reveal his desperation and entitlement. Then came the first real shock, an unexpected call from Theodore, Joshua's father. He had always been skeptical of Joshua's impulsive decisions, and he had noticed unusual activity regarding the wedding fund accounts. "Rebecca," he said, voice calm but firm, "I understand what happened. I just wanted to check in. The funds you moved are secure?" "Yes," I replied, measured. "Everything is secure. Nothing to worry about." There was a pause, then, "Good. That's all I wanted to hear." Even the adults in the story, the ones who could have been allies for Joshua, were now recognizing the precision of my response. I allowed myself a small private smile. Each move was calculated, each step deliberate. That night, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, the city lights sprawling below me, and let the adrenaline ebb. I was alone, yes, but not lonely. For the first time in months, I felt clarity. Every betrayal, every lie, every hidden truth had brought me to this moment. I wasn't just surviving, I was orchestrating the consequences. And yet, in the shadows of my mind, I knew Joshua wouldn't let this end quietly. His pride, his sense of entitlement, would demand retaliation, explanations, attempts to reclaim control. That's when I began preparing the next stage, exposing the hidden truths, the lies, the miscalculations, in a way that would leave no ambiguity. I drafted a mental plan. First, secure proof. Texts, messages, late-night calls, all cataloged and timestamped. Then, manage the social fallout. Friends, family, acquaintances, they would need to see the patterns of betrayal, not just the aftermath. Finally, expose the entanglements that he had assumed would remain hidden. As I closed my laptop, the city humming around me, I allowed a private thought to bloom, delicate and fierce. I am not the one broken here. He is. And soon the world will know it too. The first battle was over. The wedding canceled, the apartment gone, the funds secured. But the war of exposure and reckoning had only just begun. And I, Rebecca Scott, would fight it on my terms, deliberately, methodically, unflinchingly. The first few days after the move were quiet, almost deceptively calm. But I knew better. Joshua, fueled by his pride and sense of entitlement, would not stay silent. And the longer I waited, the more powerful my moves would become. I began cataloging everything: messages, emails, receipts, the faint traces of his late-night excuses, the small lies that had seemed insignificant at the time. Each detail formed a pattern, a chain that would reveal the full extent of his duplicity. I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing it for clarity, for justice, for closure. Then came the first revelation. While reviewing his messages, I noticed subtle inconsistencies, the casual mentions of meetings that weren't meetings at all. I traced them, cross-referenced with calendar entries and receipts. Each small lie exposed a larger one. His affair, hidden dinners, promises to someone else. It wasn't shocking in the sense that I hadn't already suspected, but seeing it all in black and white was almost cinematic, the horror of betrayal laid bare. I decided it was time to confront him, not in anger, but with evidence. The phone call was brief. "Rebecca, please, we can fix this," he said, desperation creeping into his voice. I let him speak for a moment, then calmly said, "We can't. I've seen everything. Every lie, every manipulation. The wedding, the apartment, the funds, it's all done. You made your choice, Joshua. Now the consequences are yours to manage." There was a pause, heavy, tense. I could hear him trying to gather words, trying to frame a counter-narrative, but I was already 3 steps ahead. I hung up, letting the silence settle like a verdict. But the confrontation alone wasn't enough. The next phase involved social consequences. Friends and family had been caught in the crossfire for months, unsure what was true, unsure who to trust. I carefully curated what they would hear: truth, framed with calm authority. No dramatics, no emotional outbursts, just evidence and facts. The reactions were immediate. Friends who had been hesitant, doubtful, or even subtly aligned with him began asking questions, seeking clarification. Every inquiry was an opportunity to reveal the patterns of deception, the entitlement, the betrayals that had been carefully hidden until now. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't manipulate. I simply presented the truth in a way that made sense, that allowed others to connect the dots themselves. Then came the more delicate part: his financial missteps. While he assumed he had power over the wedding funds, I had already moved them into secure accounts. Any attempt to reclaim them would be futile. The calmness of that realization hit him harder than anything I could say. I let the truth speak for itself. And still, there was Joshua's ex, the woman who had been the object of his attention for months. While she had seemed peripheral, her role in this story was significant. I collected subtle details, traces of her influence, and how her promises had manipulated him further. By the time the social circles began to notice inconsistencies, her complicity became undeniable. Each revelation, each subtle exposure, sent shockwaves through the small network of acquaintances. It wasn't chaos, it was precision. Each domino fell exactly where it was meant to. I watched quietly as the social fabric he had assumed he controlled unraveled around him. Late one night, sitting on my balcony with the city lights stretching out below, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The pain of betrayal was still there, sharp at times, but it was tempered by a sense of purpose. I wasn't just reacting, I was orchestrating the truth, letting it unfold naturally. And the satisfaction, quiet, deliberate, almost imperceptible, was far more powerful than anger could ever have been. By the end of the week, patterns had become narratives. Friends and family were aware, social pressure had mounted, and Joshua's carefully constructed image began to crumble. He reached out again, frantic, attempting to spin his version of events. I did not respond. Every word he spoke now had to face the scrutiny of the evidence I had assembled. The final piece fell into place when I confronted the subtle manipulations he had attempted through others, friends he thought would shield him, colleagues he assumed were indifferent. Each interaction was an opportunity to reveal inconsistencies, to quietly expose the truth. By now, the tension was almost palpable, like the calm before a storm that everyone knew was coming but couldn't yet see. It was in those moments, the strategic emails, the quiet confrontations, the slow, deliberate reveals, that I realized the real power of patience and planning. Betrayal might sting, deception might wound, but meticulous truth has a way of reshaping reality, and that was what I was doing. Reshaping reality, step by step, exposing the fractures, letting the world see the truth as it had always been. As I closed my laptop that night, I felt a rare sense of calm. The apartment was quiet, the city alive below, and the storm I had been waiting for was quietly, inexorably approaching. This was no longer just about me or Joshua or the betrayal. It was about clarity, justice, and reclaiming control, and for the first time in months I felt certain. The next stage would leave no question as to who had been betrayed and who had been strategically, unflinchingly victorious. The world outside my new apartment buzzed with its usual rhythm, indifferent to the personal storms I was orchestrating. But I was no longer a passive player. Every message I sent, every conversation I had, was part of a meticulous unfolding of consequences. Joshua, predictably, began to escalate. Desperation bled into arrogance as he tried to control the narrative among our mutual friends. He called, texted, and even attempted to corner acquaintances, spinning partial truths, fabricating stories about me, about my supposed overreaction, my obsessive control. He assumed that the chaos he created would shield him. He was wrong. I started systematically revealing inconsistencies, casual, calm updates to friends, subtle clarifications, and, most importantly, verified evidence of his lies. Screenshots of messages, calendar entries showing fabricated meetings, receipts for dinners he claimed were business only, all quietly, strategically presented. No dramatics, just facts. And with each revelation, the network of doubt around him unraveled. The reactions were immediate. Friends who had been uncertain, hesitant, or even sympathetic toward him began reaching out. Questions poured in. Are you sure about this? I heard something different. What really happened? I answered calmly, factually, allowing the weight of truth to speak louder than any accusations he could muster. Then came the professional consequences. Joshua's attempts to manipulate colleagues into taking his side backfired spectacularly. With careful discretion, I provided enough context to expose the contradictions in his story without appearing vindictive. By the end of the week, subtle whispers began to reach him. He wasn't the master of perception he thought he was. It wasn't just friends and work. The social ripple effect grew. Mutual acquaintances began noticing patterns, drawing conclusions on their own. Each interaction, each question he evaded, only magnified the inconsistencies. By midweek, the tension in his circles was tangible. He was trapped in the web he had spun for me. I allowed myself a quiet smile. Every panic-stricken call he made, every frantic text, every attempt to reclaim his image became a demonstration of the power I now wielded, not through drama, but through strategic clarity. And then the unexpected. A call from someone I hadn't anticipated, Joshua's ex. She wanted to talk. Her voice was hesitant, but there was curiosity, even caution. I didn't respond with anger. Instead, I listened. She admitted small truths about his manipulations, the subtle ways he had entangled her as leverage, without her realizing the full scope. By the time we finished the conversation, I had a clearer understanding of the entire network of deception, and another layer of evidence to reinforce the truth. Meanwhile, Joshua's attempts to retaliate became increasingly desperate. He tried to leverage our past memories, his charm, and even insinuations about my character. But by now, I had prepared for this. Each potential attack had a counter, evidence, calm logic, and the patience to let the truth speak. The crescendo approached when I realized the final piece of the puzzle was visibility. People needed to see the narrative in a way that left no doubt. So carefully, deliberately, I shared selected messages with those who could verify the patterns: trusted friends, family members, colleagues. The impact was immediate. Misunderstandings cleared. Allegiances shifted. The social and emotional consequences for Joshua began to solidify. One evening, as I sat on my balcony overlooking the city, I allowed myself a rare breath of satisfaction. The tension had peaked not through confrontation, but through strategy, not through anger, but through clarity. Joshua, once confident, was now fractured, exposed, and alone in the very social circles he had assumed were under his control. I knew the final confrontation was inevitable, but it would not be explosive, dramatic, or chaotic. It would be a culmination of everything I had meticulously prepared: truth, patience, and consequence. And when it came, there would be no ambiguity. I would not be the one betrayed, the one manipulated, or the one underestimated. For the first time in months, I felt a deep, steady calm. The apartment lights twinkled below like distant stars, and I allowed a small, private smile to bloom. 3 months of planning, observation, and quiet execution had brought me here, and the final act, the full reveal of truth and consequence, was just around the corner. The final confrontation didn't happen in a dramatic showdown or shouted accusations. It happened quietly, deliberately, with the weight of truth pressing down on Joshua like gravity. By this point, the web of deceit he had spun had begun collapsing under its own contradictions. Friends, colleagues, and even family had glimpsed the pattern: lies, manipulation, and betrayal meticulously exposed. I arranged a meeting, not for revenge, but for clarity. Just the two of us, in a neutral space, stripped of witnesses and distractions. I didn't need theatrics. My presence, calm and composed, was enough to convey authority. "Rebecca, he began, fumbling. I cut him off gently but firmly. "Joshua, you've had months to spin your story, manipulate friends, and control perception, but the truth doesn't need persuasion." He went silent, his confidence faltering. Every misstep, every lie, every act of entitlement had been cataloged, verified, and quietly shared with those who mattered. I could see the shift in him, the realization that the battle he had assumed was his to win had already been lost. I thought I could manage it," he admitted, voice low. I nodded. "You managed nothing. You assumed control, and it slipped through your fingers. Not because of me, but because reality doesn't bend to entitlement." I handed him a folder. Inside were the compiled records: messages, calendar entries, receipts, screenshots, and timelines. Evidence of every lie, every hidden promise, every betrayal. I didn't need to speak. The weight of proof said it all. He glanced through the pages, his expression shifting from disbelief to shock, then to a hollow acknowledgement. I didn't realize you knew," he whispered. I allowed myself a small, calm smile. "You didn't realize that I never stopped observing, that I planned for this moment, that I controlled my own narrative, my own future. You didn't have the power. I did." For the first time, I saw true reckoning in his eyes. Not anger, not defensiveness, just the cold realization of failure, and that was enough. But the story didn't end there. The social fallout had already begun to cement itself. Mutual friends had adjusted their perceptions. Joshua's manipulations no longer held sway. His ex, once used as leverage, now understood the truth and quietly withdrew from any further entanglement. Colleagues who had once been passive now acknowledged the patterns of deceit. And me? I was free. Free from the apartment, free from the wedding that had been stolen, free from the illusion of a man I thought I loved. I didn't just survive the betrayal. I emerged stronger, sharper, and in control of my own life. In the quiet aftermath, I reflected on the lessons. Betrayal is a cruel teacher, but strategy, patience, and self-possession are powerful antidotes. The world had tested me, and I had responded not with desperation, but with precision. Weeks later, as I settled into my new apartment, started my new job, and carved out a fresh life, I felt an unusual sense of peace. I wasn't just moving on, I was evolving. The wedding, the shared apartment, the stolen moments, they were gone, yes. But what remained was far more valuable: clarity, autonomy, and the knowledge that no one could undermine me without consequence. Occasionally, I'd hear whispers of Joshua's attempts to recover some semblance of control, but they no longer reached me. The social and professional fallout had already done its work. He was navigating the ruins of his own choices, and I observed from a distance, unbothered, undisturbed. One night, I stood by the balcony of my new home, the city lights glowing like a constellation of possibilities. The air was crisp, and I allowed myself a rare smile. 3 months of planning, patience, and quiet execution had brought me here, and now my life, entirely my own, stretched out before me. I thought about the lessons learned. Trust your instincts, never underestimate your own power, and always, always plan 3 steps ahead. Betrayal had tried to define me, but I redefined the terms. Joshua had chosen the path of entitlement, manipulation, and deceit. I had chosen clarity, autonomy, and victory. And in the end, victory was sweeter when measured in freedom rather than revenge. I closed the balcony door, took a deep breath, and whispered to myself, "This is my life, my rules, my peace." The past was behind me, and the future unwritten, promising, entirely mine.